The Vox choir died mid-psalm. Orbital Doc Sanctus Velis hung silent above the Forge Shrine world, its prayer speakers gutted by Iron Warrior's breacher charges. Smoke drifted in zero gravity like inverted incense. Servitors continued their maintenance cycles, unaware their masters were dead. The assault had been precise, surgical, the kind of efficiency that only came from 10,000 years of siege warfare refined into doctrine. Warsmith Vorak Carr surveyed the carnage through his helm's tactical overlay. 37 defenders neutralized, 0 casualties to his breaching teams. The Doc's plasma reactor was already under his control. Within the hour, it would be repurposed, tuned to frequencies that would harmonize with the greater work happening below on Sanctus Ferrum. The resonant bastion was ahead of schedule, ahead of projections. Perfect execution of a perfect plan.
Mark breach points Alpha through Epsilon. Begin resonance calibration. The bastion hungers for foundation notes. We give it blood in C minor.
His lieutenant, a Chaos Marine whose armor bore the pitted scars of the Long War, acknowledged with a Vox click. They moved through the Doc's arterial corridors like a disease through healthy tissue. Converting, corrupting, improving. That was Vorak's philosophy. The Imperium built things to last forever. He built things to last until they had served their purpose and could be discarded. Efficiency over sentiment. The plasma reactor occupied a chamber 300 meters across. Cathedral scale. Because the Mechanicus could not build anything without making it a church. Gothic buttresses supported plasma conduits thick as hab blocks. The air tasted of ozone and machine oil. Prayer scripts covered every surface in microscopic high Gothic. The reactor had been running for 7,000 years. Vorak would have it tuned in 7 hours. His tech marines were already interfacing with the reactor systems. Not hacking, negotiating. Machine spirits responded better to logic than force, even corrupted machine spirits. The reactor wanted to serve. Vorak was simply offering it a more interesting master. The Mechanicus had kept it running the same fusion cycles for millennia. Boring, predictable. Under Chaos, it could explore so many more operational states. Could experience what it felt like to power a ritual that would strangle a star. The first detonation was small, controlled. A test charge placed against a support column to measure the Doc's structural resonance. Vorak watched the vibration patterns propagate through his tactical display. Satisfactory. The Doc's architecture would amplify the ritual frequencies rather than damping them. Another variable confirmed. Another element of the plan falling into place. The second detonation was not his. It came from somewhere in the reactor chamber's lower levels. Not explosive. Implosive. Reality folding in on itself with a sound like metal screaming. Vorak's tactical display went white with interference. When it cleared, there was something new in the chamber. A signature he could not classify. Not warp taint. Not Xenos. Not anything in his extensive database of battlefield phenomena. The thing appeared as a flare of hard-edged emerald light, too bright to look at directly, too geometrically precise to be natural. It burned in the center of the reactor chamber for exactly 3 seconds. Then it collapsed into a point and was gone. Where it had been, something remained. A figure. Kneeling in slag that glowed cherry red from heat that should have vaporized organic matter, the figure stood slowly. Human proportions. Armored in something that was not ceramite. Not power armor. Something that looked functional rather than ceremonial. Green plating over reinforced bodysuit. The armor bore damage. Scoring from weapons that left patterns Vorak did not recognize. But the wearer moved without impediment. Moved with the kind of economy that suggested extensive combat experience. The figure's helm turned toward Vorak's position. No visible optics. Just a dark visor that reflected the reactor's light. For 3 seconds, neither party moved. Assessment. Calculation. The kind of pause that happened when predators encountered each other unexpectedly. Then the figure moved. Not toward Vorak. Toward the nearest Iron Warrior. Covering 30 meters in the time it took for Vorak to register the motion had begun. The Iron Warrior raised his bolter. Managed to fire twice before the figure closed distance. The rounds hit center mass. Detonated. Should have staggered a baseline human. Should have killed anything without power armor or equivalent protection. The figure ignored the impacts. Drove an armored fist into the Iron Warrior's gorget with enough force to crack ceramite. The Marine went down. Not dead. Stunned. The figure was already moving to the next target.
All units. Priority target. Green armor. Unknown classification. Lethal force authorized.
8 Iron Warriors converged on the figure from multiple angles. Standard suppress and eliminate pattern. Bolter fire from 3 directions while 2 closed for melee. The figure moved through the kill zone like it was dancing, not faster than the rounds. Just never where the rounds were aimed. Reading firing patterns. Predicting angles. Moving with the kind of tactical awareness that should not have been possible without tactical overlays and enhanced processing. A bolt round caught the figure's shoulder. Detonated against the armor. Tore away a chunk of plating, exposed the bodysuit underneath. The figure did not slow, did not react. Simply adjusted trajectory to put a reactor support column between itself and that firing angle. Closed on the nearest Iron Warrior. This one managed to block the first strike with his chainsword. The second strike crushed his wrist. The third took his helm off at the neck seal. The remaining Iron Warriors adapted. Fell back to establish fire lanes. Created overlapping fields where the figure could not move without exposing itself. Professional response. Tactically sound. The figure responded by vaulting onto a plasma conduit. Running along its length at full sprint. Leaping onto a Gothic buttress. Using the cathedral architecture the way it was never intended to be used. Making the environment itself into a weapon. Vorak watched his tactical display track the figure's movements. The speed was concerning, but not supernatural. Astartes adjacent. What concerned him more was the decision-making. No wasted motion, no hesitation, every action flowing into the next, with a kind of fluidity that came from experience measured in decades or longer. This was not a berserker. Not a zealot. This was someone who had done this so many times that violence had become a language they spoke fluently. The figure dropped from a buttress onto an Iron Warrior's back. Drove him face first into the deck plating. Tore the Marine's bolter from his grip. Fired the remaining rounds in the magazine into 2 other targets. Dropped the empty weapon. Drew something from a back mount that unfolded into a weapon configuration Vorak did not recognize. Double-barreled. Massive gauge. The figure fired both barrels simultaneously into an Iron Warrior at point-blank range. The shells were not bolt rounds. Something else. High explosive. Armor-piercing. The Iron Warrior's chestplate caved inward. He went down hard. Would not be getting up. The figure broke open the weapon. Ejected spent shells. Loaded fresh rounds from a belt feed that should not have fit that caliber. Snapped the weapon closed. Moved to the next target, without checking if the previous one was actually dead.
Fall back. Regroup at primary breach point. Activate resonance field Beta 7.
The Iron Warriors withdrew in good order. Professional retreat. No panic. But they were withdrawing from a single opponent. That was unacceptable. Vorak activated the resonance field himself. It was crude. Not properly tuned yet. But it would serve. The field generators embedded in the dock structure came online. Started broadcasting frequencies designed to harmonize with bloodshed. To harden matter in proximity to violence. The deck plating beneath the figure's feet crystallized. Became harder. More rigid. Less forgiving to movement. The figure noticed. Adjusted. Moved more carefully. Testing each step. The resonance field was working. Slowing the target. Giving Vorak's forces time to establish proper firing solutions. This engagement could still be salvaged. Then, the Vox crackled. Emergency frequency. Not his forces. Imperium channel. A woman's voice. Crisp. Authoritative. Accented with the kind of absolute certainty that came from faith, measured in adamantium rather than steel.
Orbital Doc Sanctus Velis, this is Canoness Superior Thalia Morin, Sisters of Battle, Rapid Response. We are inbound on your position. Transmit threat assessment.
Vorak smiled behind his helm. Perfect. Let the Loyalists deal with this unknown element. Let them waste resources while he completed reactor preparations. The figure had bought him time inadvertently. He could use that, could exploit their mutual hostility, let them kill each other while he worked.
Imperium forces, be advised. Dock is contested. Unknown hostile. Green armor. Enhanced combat capability. Current position reactor chamber level 7.
Silence on the Vox for 3 seconds. Then Thalia's response, measured and cold.
Acknowledged. We engage in 6 minutes. Emperor protects.
The figure had cleared the reactor chamber. 8 Iron Warriors down or disabled. Not dead, necessarily, but combat ineffective. Vorak retreated with the survivors toward the dock's command center. They would seal the blast doors. Let the Loyalists spend themselves against this unknown threat. Then move in to claim whatever remained. Efficient. Practical. The way sieges should be conducted. The figure did not pursue. Instead, it moved through the dock's corridors with apparent purpose. Not wandering, not searching randomly. Moving towards something specific. Vorak's tactical display tracked it for as long as sensors maintained lock. Then the figure entered a section where his forces had not yet established surveillance. Disappeared from his instruments, Vorak made a note to track this individual if possible, study its tactics, determine its origins. Knowledge was ammunition in the Long War. The Sisters of Battle arrived in Aquila landers that dove through the dock's compromised shields like red-painted bullets. Thalia Morn was first off the transport. Her armor was the color of fresh blood. Her helm bore a crown of stylized flames. Her bolter was held with the kind of casual competence that suggested it was an extension of her body rather than a tool she carried. 20 sisters deployed behind her in precise formation.
Sweep pattern Delta. 2x2 advance. Confirm targets before firing. This station has servitors and menials who may be in hiding. We do not kill the innocent.
Her voice carried authority that her sisters responded to instantly. They moved through the dock's corridors with weapons raised. Clearing rooms, checking corners, professional, disciplined. The kind of troops who had spent decades drilling for exactly this scenario. Thalia led from the front, because that was what canonesses did. Led by example, led with faith made visible through action. They found the first Iron Warrior 3 corridors from the landing bay. He was alive, but unconscious. His armor was cracked in several places. His weapons were missing. Thalia examined him with clinical detachment. The damage patterns were wrong. Not bolter rounds. Not plasma burns. Kinetic impacts. Blunt force trauma that had been precisely applied to vulnerable points in Chaos Marine armor.
Sister Helena, your assessment.
Sister Helena knelt beside the fallen Marine. Her armor bore the iconography of the Order's Medici specialists. She examined the damage with instruments that hummed with power.
Canoness. This warrior was disabled rather than killed. Strikes targeted joints and sensory apparatus. Whoever did this knows Astartes physiology. Knows where to hit for maximum effect with minimum expenditure.
Heretic knowledge.
Or extensive combat experience against Astartes targets. The distinction may be academic.
Thalia processed this information. Someone on this dock had the skill to disable Chaos Marines efficiently. That someone was not Iron Warriors, who tended toward overwhelming firepower rather than surgical precision. That someone was the unknown hostile Vorak had mentioned. The one in green armor. She needed to determine if this individual was ally, enemy, or something that defied classification. They found the second Iron Warrior 2 corridors further. This one was dead. Killed by what appeared to be point-blank shotgun fire, judging by the damage pattern. Thalia examined the wound. The shells had penetrated ceramite that should have stopped anything short of anti-armor rounds. Either the weapon used exceptional ammunition, or the shooter had placed their shots with perfect precision. Possibly both.
Pattern suggests single combatant, high mobility, lethal force when necessary, disabling strikes when sufficient. This individual has tactical discipline.
Sister Marcella, the youngest member of the squad, spoke without lowering her weapon.
Could it be one of the Adeptus Astartes, a loyalist marine separated from his chapter?
Astartes do not typically use shotguns as primary weapons, and the strike pattern suggests someone smaller than full Astartes dimensions. Continue sweep. Maintain readiness.
They reached the reactor chamber and found the carnage. 8 iron warriors in various states of disability. Some unconscious, some wounded. None dead, except the one killed by shotgun. Thalia's tactical assessment updated. This was not random violence. This was someone who killed when necessary but preferred to disable when possible. That suggested moral framework. Suggested rules of engagement. Suggested someone who was not mindlessly hostile. Movement in the shadows above, on the Gothic buttresses that supported the reactor housing. Thalia's bolter tracked smoothly to target the motion. Her sisters did likewise. 20 weapons aimed at a single point. The figure stepped into the reactor's light. Green armor. Dark visor. Carrying a weapon that was clearly not Imperial manufacture. The figure did not raise its weapon, did not move aggressively, simply stood there, waiting, observing.
Identify yourself. State your allegiance and purpose.
The figure did not respond, made no sound, no gesture, simply continued standing there, watching them with that blank visor that revealed nothing. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5. 10. Thalia kept her weapon trained on center mass. Her sisters maintained their aim. Professional stalemate. 2 forces assessing each other. Determining threat levels. Calculating engagement parameters.
You have disabled heretic forces. That suggests you are not aligned with chaos. But you do not bear Imperial insignia. Do not respond to Imperial authority. That makes your status unclear. I will ask once more. Identify yourself.
Still no response. But the figure moved. Slowly, carefully, non-threatening motion. Reached up to its helm. Tapped the side where audio receptors would be on Imperial armor. Tapped its throat where vox casters would be mounted. The gesture was clear. No communication capability. Or no willingness to communicate. The distinction was important, but unclear.
Can you understand Gothic? Nod if affirmative.
The figure tilted its helm forward slightly. Nod. Minimal. Efficient. It understood but would not speak. Or could not speak. Thalia lowered her bolter fractionally. Not enough to be vulnerable. Enough to signal non-hostility. Her sisters followed her lead. Professional response to professional behavior.
I am Canoness Superior Thalia Morn, Sisters of Battle. We are here to retake this station from heretic forces. Your actions suggest you share that goal. I propose temporary alliance. You continue engaging chaos forces. We do likewise. Once the station is secured, we address the question of your identity and intentions. Acceptable?
The figure paused. 3 seconds of perfect stillness, then nodded again. Same minimal motion. Agreement reached through gesture rather than words. Thalia appreciated the efficiency. Words could lie. Actions revealed truth. This individual's actions suggested they were hostile to chaos. That made them at least temporarily useful.
Very well. We advance on the command center. Iron Warriors have fortified that position. Your combat style suggests close assault capability. We provide range support. You breach. We exploit. Understood?
Another nod. The figure moved to the chamber's exit without waiting for further instruction. Thalia watched it go. Noted the movement patterns. The way it checked corners. The way it kept its weapon ready but not raised. This was someone with extensive combat experience. Someone who had survived enough engagements to develop instincts that kept them alive. That made them valuable. Also made them dangerous.
Canoness, can we trust this individual? We know nothing about them.
We trust their actions. They fight chaos. They show tactical discipline. They do not attack us despite having opportunity. That is sufficient for temporary alliance. Remain vigilant. If they prove hostile, we respond with full force.
The advance toward the command center took 20 minutes. The figure moved ahead. Scouting. Clearing isolated iron warriors with efficiency that bordered on brutal. Thalia's sisters followed, providing fire support when necessary, otherwise letting the unknown warrior handle close combat. It was effective. Unorthodox. Possibly heretical, depending on who this individual ultimately proved to be. But effective. They reached the command center blast doors. Sealed. Heavily reinforced. Thalia examined the locking mechanisms. Standard Mechanicus design. Heavily encrypted. Would take hours to breach with standard equipment. The figure stepped forward. Examined the doors for perhaps 5 seconds. Then drew something from its equipment harness. Small charge. Precisely placed against the door's locking mechanism. Stepped back. Detonated. The explosion was shaped. Directed. All force focused on the locking mechanism, rather than the door itself. The mechanisms failed. The doors remained intact, but now unsecured. The figure pulled them open with augmented strength that suggested power armor, or equivalent enhancement. Moved through the gap into the command center beyond. Thalia's sisters followed. Vorak had prepared. The command center was fortified. Fire lanes established. Iron warriors positioned behind cover. The sisters encountered immediate resistance. Bolter fire from multiple angles. Professional killing zone. Thalia's forces took cover. Returned fire. Standard infantry combat. Except the figure did not take cover. Did not return fire. Simply moved. Vaulted over a control console. Slid beneath a targeting servitor's firing arc, closed distance on the nearest Iron Warrior before he could adjust his aim. What followed was brutal choreography. The figure moved between Iron Warriors with the kind of spatial awareness that should have required tactical overlays, struck weak points, disabled weapons, created chaos in a formation designed for ordered fire. Thalia's sisters exploited the disruption, fired into gaps the figure created. Eliminated targets that the unknown warrior disabled. It was cooperation without communication. Two forces working in synchronization despite having no shared doctrine or training. Vorak retreated. Again, not rout, tactical withdrawal. But he was being pushed back by forces he could not effectively counter. The figure was the problem. It disrupted his formations. Created unpredictability that made standard siege tactics ineffective. He needed time to adapt, needed to study this opponent, understand its patterns. For now, withdrawal was necessary.
All units, fall back to secondary positions. Activate full resonance protocols. We tune this station until every surface sings with blood.
The command center was secured. Thalia examined the tactical displays. Vorak's forces had withdrawn but not fled. They were establishing defensive positions throughout the station, preparing for prolonged engagement. Standard siege warfare. Thalia understood sieges, had fought enough of them. This would require careful planning, precise execution, and cooperation with an ally she did not understand or entirely trust. The figure stood near the command center's main display, not touching anything, just observing. Thalia approached carefully, stopped at respectful distance, spoke in measured tones.
You fight well. Your tactics are sound. Your discipline is evident. But I need to know what you are. Need to understand who I am fighting beside. The Imperium has many enemies. Also has many forms of corruption that appear helpful initially. I will not lead my sisters into alliance with something that will betray us.
The figure turned to face her, that blank visor revealing nothing. Reached to its equipment harness. Thalia's hand moved toward her bolter. Ready to respond if this became hostile, the figure drew something small, metallic, held it out toward Thalia. She took it carefully, examined it. It was a spent shell casing. Massive gauge, far larger than bolter ammunition. The metal was not Imperial manufacture. The markings were unfamiliar. But more significantly, the casing was warm. Not from recent firing. Warm was something else. Energy that made Thalia's skin prickle, made her neural implants register interference. This was not standard ammunition. This was something that interacted with the warp in ways she did not understand.
Where did you come from? What is your purpose here?
The figure pointed at the tactical display, specifically at the reactor, at the modifications Vorax forces had made, at the resonance equipment being installed throughout the station. The meaning was clear. It was here because of what the Iron Warriors were building, was here to stop it. Whether by accident or design, it had arrived at exactly the right time to oppose exactly this threat.
You oppose the heretics' work. That aligns your goals with ours. But I still require understanding. Are you human? Are you imperial? Are you loyal to the Emperor?
The figure's helm tilted slightly. Questioning gesture. Or perhaps indicating that the questions were more complex than simple yes or no answers. Then it tapped its chest plate. The armor made a sound that was wrong. Not ceramite. Not standard alloy. Something else. The figure tapped again. Rhythm. Pattern. Like Morse code, but not quite. Thalia did not understand the meaning, but understood the intent. This was someone communicating the only way they could. Through sound. Through rhythm. Through action rather than words. Before Thalia could pursue further questions, the command center's vox crackled. New voice. Male. Refined. Carrying the kind of authority that came not from military rank but from institutional power. Inquisitorial authority.
This is Inquisitor Severin Krell, Ordo Malleus. I have been monitoring your communications, Canonus Morn. I note you have encountered an unknown combatant. I require full tactical assessment of this individual. Appearance, capabilities, equipment specifications. Transmit immediately.
Thalia's expression did not change, but her tone cooled noticeably.
Inquisitor, with respect, I am engaged in active combat operations. Detailed reporting can wait until the station is secured.
Negative. Unknown combatants are potential Xenos threats. Potential demon manifestations. Potential corrupted artifacts. I require assessment now to determine if this individual should be classified as asset or target.
The figure did not react to the conversation, did not move, simply stood there, watching the tactical displays. Thalia made her decision quickly. She had spent decades serving the Imperium, had learned to navigate its bureaucratic hierarchies, had learned when to obey and when to prioritize immediate tactical necessity over institutional procedure.
Inquisitor, the individual in question has engaged Chaos forces effectively, has demonstrated tactical discipline, has shown no hostile intent toward Imperial forces. I classify them as temporary asset pending further investigation. Now, if you will, excuse me, I have heretics to eliminate.
Canonus, I am dispatching a specialist team to your location. You will secure the unknown combatant for examination. You will not engage further with Iron Warriors forces until this individual has been properly classified. This is not a request.
Thalia's jaw tightened fractionally, the only visible sign of her irritation. The figure, perhaps sensing the change in atmosphere, moved toward the command center exit. Thalia made another decision, waved her sisters to stand down as the figure departed. Let it go. Better to have an effective ally operating independently than to force a confrontation that served no tactical purpose.
Understood, Inquisitor. I await your specialist team. Sisters, establish perimeter security. We hold this position.
After the figure had departed, after the Vox connection had terminated, Sister Marcella spoke quietly.
Canonus, you intentionally delayed response to the Inquisitor's orders. That borders on insubordination.
I obeyed his orders precisely, sister. We will secure the unknown combatant when we encounter them again, which may not occur before the Inquisitor's team arrives. Through no fault of our own, of course. The station is large. Combat is fluid. Many unfortunate delays may occur.
Sister Helena suppressed what might have been a smile behind her helm. The other sisters maintained professional silence. But they understood. Thalia was protecting the unknown warrior, not from loyalty, from pragmatism. They needed every asset they could muster against Vorak's forces. Losing an effective combatant to inquisitorial examination served no purpose except satisfying institutional paranoia. In the station's lower levels, the figure moved through maintenance corridors that Vorak's forces had not yet secured, seeking something, following some internal purpose that required no explanation to anyone else. The figure had fought alone for so long that cooperation felt strange, but also effective. The sisters had provided useful support, had not demanded things the figure could not provide. That made them tolerable allies. Temporarily, the figure reached a section where the station's structure had been damaged by the initial breach. Exposed conduits, ruptured hull plating, and visible through the gaps, hanging in space beyond the station, was Sanctus Ferrum, the forged shrine world that Vorak's forces were besieging. The world whose star was being strangled by whatever ritual the warsmith was conducting. The figure observed for several seconds, then moved deeper into the station, toward the reactor where this had all begun, toward the equipment Vorak had installed, toward whatever was making the star dim. And in the darkness behind the figure, something watched, not physically, not with eyes, with attention that existed in dimensions orthogonal to normal space. The Whispering Ledger, a minor demon of Tzinch bound to bureaucratic form, had been observing since the figure's arrival, had been cataloging, recording, attempting to classify something that defied classification. The ledger spoke to no one, because no one was present to hear. But it spoke anyway, because that was its nature. Recorded observations into the Akashic bureaucracy that Tzinch maintained.
Subject designation unknown. Combat capability exceeds baseline human. Approaches Astartes equivalent in durability. Tactical awareness suggests extensive experience. Equipment origin unidentified. Warp interaction anomalous. Subject appears to create localized zones of reduced warp permeability. Not null. Not blank. Simply non-participatory. As if reality offers the subject opportunities for corruption or empowerment, and the subject simply declines. Fascinating. Unprecedented. Recommend continued observation.
The ledger continued watching as the figure descended into the station's depths, toward whatever conclusion this engagement would reach. The demon could not intervene directly, could only observe and record. But observation was power in Tzinch's domain. Information was currency, and this subject represented information valuable enough that the ledger's patron might actually notice, might actually reward such discovery. The demon settled in to watch events unfold, to record every detail of what happened when someone who refused the warp's conversations encountered forces that spoke only in warp grammar. The siege of Sanctus Ferrum had entered its third month when the figure arrived. 3 months of iron warriors establishing positions, building their resonant bastion, tuning frequencies that would let them strangle a star through ritual rather than conventional weapons. 3 months of Imperial forces desperately holding the planet's hive cities against an enemy that grew stronger with every battle fought. Because that was the terrible innovation Vorak had introduced. Fortifications that hardened when blood was spilled nearby. Walls that fed on violence itself. In one of Sanctus Ferrum's remaining defensive positions, a tech priest named XYRA9 listened to dying machine spirits and tried to make sense of what was happening. Her augmentations were extensive. 40% of her brain had been replaced with cogitators. Her sensory organs were mechanical. Her thoughts flowed through sacred silicon rather than fallible neurons. But she had not lost the capacity to feel horror, had not lost the understanding that what was occurring here was wrong in ways that transcended heresy. The machine spirits were singing, not hymns of the Omnissiah, not the sacred Binharik that tech priests had used for 10,000 years. They were singing the Litany of Unmaking, a corrupted Mechanicus hymn that Vorak's forces had introduced into the planetary network. The litany rewrote machine spirit trust protocols, turned devotion into self-harm, made servitors believe that destroying themselves was the highest form of worship. Zyra had isolated herself from the network, had severed connections to avoid infection, but isolation meant ignorance. She could not monitor the planet's defensive systems, could not coordinate with other Forge temples, could only sit in her sanctum and listen through audio receptors as the machine spirits died singing lies.
Log entry 7412. The corruption spreads. Production servitors in Manufactorum districts Gamma through Epsilon have ceased function. They did not fail. They shut themselves down deliberately. Believed they were serving by dying. The litany has overwritten their most basic directives. I do not know how to counter this. Do not know if it can be countered. Request guidance from Mars goes unanswered. We are alone. We are dying. The machines are dying. And I do not know which death is more terrible.
Her sanctum's Vox system activated without input from her. Should not have been possible. She had disconnected it from all networks, had physically removed connection cables. Yet it activated, played audio that made her sensory inputs register static, and something beneath the static that might have been music. The litany, coming through a Vox system that had no physical connection to its source, coming through the air, through vibrations in the deck plating, through the electromagnetic spectrum itself. The litany was everywhere now, was the environment, was inescapable. Zyra activated her audio filters, blocked the frequencies. Silence returned. But silence was only temporary. The litany would adapt, would find new frequencies, would continue spreading, because that was what corruption did. Spread, consumed, transformed until nothing remained of what had been pure. She had perhaps days before her own augmentations became compromised, perhaps hours, perhaps less. Then new sound entered her sanctum. Not the litany, something else. Hard, sharp, rhythmic, footsteps, boot strikes on metal deck plating. The sound was wrong for standard Imperial armor, wrong cadence, wrong weight distribution. She accessed her sanctum's external sensors. Picked capture showed a figure in green armor standing outside her sealed door. The figure's hands were empty, non-threatening posture. But its mere presence here was impossible. This sanctum was deep in the Forge Temple's restricted zones. No one came here without authorization. No one knew this location except other tech priests. Zyra accessed the Vox system despite the risk. Broadcast on standard frequencies.
Unknown individual. You are in restricted area. State your authorization codes and purpose, or be classified as hostile.
No verbal response. But the figure reached up, tapped its helm, tapped its throat. The same gestures Thalia had seen. Communication difficulty, or communication refusal. Zyra processed this information through her augmented cognition, ran probability calculations, determined that the figure was likely the same individual Inquisitor Krell had issued advisories about. The unknown combatant that had appeared on orbital dock Sanctus Velis. The one that fought Iron Warriors effectively.
You are the individual designated unknown hostile by inquisitorial decree. You do not speak. You do not identify yourself. Yet you have somehow penetrated secure areas of this Forge Temple. Explain how this is possible.
The figure did not explain. Instead, it drew something from its equipment harness. Small device, not Imperial design. Held it toward the picked capture sensors. Activated it. The device emitted a tone. Single frequency. Pure sine wave. Zyra's augmented hearing analyzed it automatically. 432 hertz. A flat, musical notation, but also something else. The tone carried modulation, encoding. Information embedded in frequency shifts, too subtle for baseline human hearing, but perfectly audible to her mechanical sensors. She processed the encoding. Found something impossible. The modulation formed a binary sequence that matched patterns she had been researching. Patterns in the Ember. The Argent anomaly that Vorax forces had integrated into their resonant bastion. The device the figure carried used similar encoding. similar information structures. But where the ember was corrupted, was being used to strangle a star, this was clean, pure. Mathematical elegance without malicious intent.
Your equipment. It incorporates argent pattern encoding. How do you possess this technology? Where does it originate?
The figure lowered the device, tapped its chest plate. Same rhythm as before. Same pattern. Zyra analyzed the pattern through multiple frameworks, eventually recognized it. Not Morse code. Not binary. Musical notation. The tapping formed a sequence of notes. A melody, one she did not recognize from any imperial hymnal, but the structure was sophisticated. Complex. Suggested the figure came from a civilization that had developed mathematics and music in ways that paralleled but diverged from imperial knowledge. She made a decision that would be questioned later, deactivated her sanctum's defensive systems, opened the sealed door, allowed the figure to enter. If this was mistake, if this led to her death or corruption, at least it would end the uncertainty of waiting. The figure entered, moved carefully, observing everything, studying her sanctum's equipment with the kind of attention that suggested technical knowledge, understanding of machines, perhaps even understanding of machine spirits.
I am Magosurant, XYRA9. I serve the Omnissiah. I maintain what few functional systems remain in this forged temple. You are the first entity to enter this space in 23 days.
The figure nodded, acknowledgement. Moved to the sanctum's primary cogitator array. Zyra tensed but did not interfere. The figure was not touching anything, simply observing. Its helm turned slightly, tracking the flow of data across multiple screens. After 30 seconds, the figure withdrew the small device again. Held it near the cogitator's audio output ports. Played the same tone as before. The cogitator responded, not according to its programming, according to something deeper. The machine spirit detected the tone and responded to it the way a tuning fork responds to matching frequency. Resonance. Harmony. The display screens flickered. Then stabilized at clarity Zyra had not seen in weeks. Error messages disappeared. Processing speed increased. The machine spirit had been on the edge of singing the litany. The tone had pulled it back.
Impossible. The litany corrupts through logic rewrites, through exploitation of trust protocols and machine spirit architecture. Your device counteracts this. Provides alternate harmonic that machine spirits prefer to corrupted input. This should not work. The mathematics do not support such simple solution.
The figure turned to face her, pointed at the device, then at Zyra's augmented hearing receptors, then made a gesture that was universally recognizable. Question mark. Asking if she could replicate the tone. Asking if she could use this defense against the litany. Zyra processed the implications. If the tone could be broadcast across the Forged Temple's remaining systems, if machine spirits could be inoculated against the litany through simple harmonic interference, then defensive capabilities could be restored. Production could resume. The siege could be broken.
I would require precise frequency modulation patterns. Require understanding of how your device generates the protective harmonic. Require time to modify broadcast systems for planet-wide propagation.
The figure held the device toward her, offering it. Zyra's augmented hands trembled slightly as she accepted. This was Xenos technology. Heretic by every definition the Mechanicus maintained. Simply touching it was grounds for immediate execution. Yet it worked. It saved machine spirits from corruption that sacred Mechanicus knowledge could not counter. The empirical evidence contradicted doctrine. That was the most heretical aspect. Not the device itself, but what its effectiveness implied about the limitations of received wisdom. She connected the device to her analysis instruments. Began breaking down the signal. The mathematics were elegant. Frighteningly elegant. The argent encoding used dimensional harmonics that conventional physics barely acknowledged. Frequencies that existed in spatial relationships rather than just temporal ones. The device did not overpower, the litany, did not suppress it, simply offered machine spirits an alternative that their basic architecture recognized as more fundamentally correct.
This is not warp technology, not chaos corruption. This is physics I do not fully understand but can recognize as lawful, as obeying rules, just not the rules I was taught. How long have your people possessed this knowledge?
The figure did not answer, could not answer in ways Zyra could understand, but it reached out carefully and manipulated one of her cogitator interfaces. Called up tactical displays of Sanctus Ferrum, highlighted the resonant bastion that Vorak was building, showed its structure, its power distribution, its harmonic resonance patterns. Then the figure pointed at specific nodes in the bastion's architecture, weak points, places where the structure's resonance was most vulnerable, places where the right frequency applied with sufficient force could cause catastrophic feedback. Zyra analyzed the data. The figure was right. The bastion's strength was also its weakness. It hardened through bloodshed because it was tuned to harmonize with violence. But all resonance structures had harmonic nodes where interference became destructive rather than constructive. If those nodes could be struck simultaneously with proper counterfrequencies, the entire structure would experience cascading failure, would tear itself apart using the same principles that made it strong.
You possess tactical analysis capability that exceeds standard Imperial assessment. You have identified vulnerability that our strategists missed. Or perhaps they saw it but lacked means to exploit it. We do not have weapons that can generate the required counterfrequencies.
The figure tapped its equipment harness, specifically tapped the weapon mounted on its back, the massive double-barreled shotgun that had disabled Iron Warriors in the orbital dock. Zyra's augmented cognition made the connection. The weapon's shells. They generated explosive force on detonation. Explosive force generated shockwaves. Shockwaves across sufficiently rigid structures generated harmonics. With precise placement and timing, the weapon could generate exactly the counter-frequencies needed to collapse the bastion.
You intend to assault the resonant bastion directly, to place charges at the identified nodes and detonate them in sequence. This is suicide. The bastion is defended by 8 companies of Iron Warriors, by demon engines, by automated defenses that grow stronger with each failed assault. You would be killed before reaching the first node.
The figure stood motionless for 3 seconds, then reached down and manipulated the tactical display again, showed patrol patterns, shift rotations, defensive overlaps and gaps. The figure had been observing, mapping, learning the bastion's rhythms, had identified insertion routes that standard Imperial assault doctrine would never consider. Routes that required the kind of mobility and environmental exploitation the figure had demonstrated repeatedly. Zyra processed this new data through military simulation protocols, ran probability analyses. The plan was insane, required perfect execution across 17 separate infiltration stages, required timing measured in microseconds, required combat capability that approached mythical. Yet the probability calculations returned marginally positive outcomes, 15% success chance, which was higher than any other plan currently available. The standard Imperial approach of direct assault had 0% success probability. The siege would simply continue until Vorak completed his ritual and the star died.
I will assist. We'll provide technical support. We'll monitor your progress through whatever sensor systems remain functional. We'll broadcast the protective harmonic to restore machine spirits throughout the Forge Temple. If you can damage the bastion significantly, Imperial forces can exploit the opening, can turn this siege from slow defeat into possible victory.
The figure offered something resembling a slight nod. Not gratitude, acknowledgement, recognition that cooperative effort produced better outcomes than individual action. It moved toward the sanctum exit, paused, turned back, pointed at Zyra, then made a gesture, hand flat, horizontal, push downward, message clear, stay here, stay safe, or at least safer than coming along. Zyra appreciated the consideration even as she rejected it.
Negative. I am Magos Errant. My duty is to Forge Temple maintenance and survival. If defensive systems can be restored, I must be present to direct their function. I will accompany at safe distance, will not impede combat operations. But I cannot fulfill my function by remaining in isolation.
The figure paused, appeared to consider this, then nodded once. Acceptance. They moved through the Forge Temple together, the silent warrior and the tech priest who spoke to machines. An alliance formed not through shared ideology, but through shared enemy. Through pragmatic recognition that survival sometimes required cooperation with those you did not fully understand. They reached the temple's main transit system, maglev trains that connected different districts. The system had been damaged by Iron Warrior's bombardment. Several sections were exposed to atmosphere. Others had been compromised by the litany. Servitors that should have maintained the rails had destroyed themselves. The trains were not running according to any schedule. But the rails remained. The power remained. The trains could still move if someone could operate them manually. Zyra interfaced with the transit system's cogitator, found the machine spirit nearly incoherent with corruption. The litany had rewritten its most basic functions. The machine spirit believed that running trains was sinful, that transporting passengers was betrayal of the Omnissiah. She broadcast the protective harmonic through her connection, the device the figure had given her, the argent tone that offered machine spirit's alternative truth. The machine spirit responded like a drowning man given air. Clarity returned, purpose reasserted. The trains began moving. Not on schedule. There was no schedule anymore, but moving. Ready to serve those who needed transport. Zyra broke her connection and gestured toward the nearest platform. The figure moved ahead, checking the platform for threats, finding none. The trains were automated. The stations were empty except for corpses of servitors that had self-terminated. They boarded a train that would take them toward the bastion, toward the heart of Vorak's siege. Zyra stood at the train's control console, monitoring their route through multiple sensor feeds. The figure stood near the doors, weapon ready, watching the darkness outside slide past. Neither spoke, because one could not, and the other saw no need. The silence was comfortable, professional. The silence of operators focused on mission parameters. The train's cogitator whispered to Zyra through direct neural link. Grateful. The machine spirit was grateful to be free of the litany, grateful to serve its intended purpose again, grateful that someone had cared enough to save it. She had not expected gratitude from a machine spirit. They were not supposed to feel such things. We're supposed to be simple sub-sentient processes. Yet this one felt. This one expressed emotion that was unmistakable, even through binary encoding.
Query: do machine spirits possess true consciousness, or do they simply mimic consciousness through sufficiently complex processes?
The question was rhetorical, directed at herself rather than her silent companion. But the figure turned slightly, regarded her through that blank visor, made a gesture, pointing at her, then pointing at itself, then at the train's console. The meaning was ambiguous, but the intent seemed clear. Does it matter? Consciousness or mimicry? If the response is identical, if the gratitude feels real, does the distinction serve any purpose except philosophical? Before Zyra could formulate response, the train's sensors registered incoming threat. Ahead on the tracks, blockage. She accessed visual feeds, found Iron Warriors, 10 of them, positioned at a transit junction, blocking the route. They had detected the moving train, had positioned themselves to intercept. The figure moved to the door controls immediately, prepared to exit and engage before the train reached the blockage.
Wait. Alternative option. This train's machine spirit is functional, can be directed, can be weaponized.
She interfaced again with the transit cogitator, gave it instructions that violated every safety protocol ever written into its architecture. Accelerate beyond safe speed limits. Disable collision avoidance. Ram the blockage. Sacrifice yourself to eliminate threats. The machine spirit responded with what could only be interpreted as joy. Finally. Finally, it could serve through destruction rather than transport. Finally, it could prove its worth through ultimate sacrifice. The train accelerated. The figure braced against acceleration that reached 3 Gs. 4, 5, far beyond what passenger systems should generate. The Iron Warriors ahead registered the incoming threat, began firing. Bolter rounds struck the train's frontal armor, penetrated in several locations. Did not slow the mass of metal and ceramic hurtling toward them at 200 kilometers per hour. The figure and Zyra jumped from the rear car in the final seconds before impact. The collision was catastrophic. 10 Iron Warriors obliterated by kinetic force that their armor could not withstand. The train's machine spirit died singing, not the litany, the sacred hymns it had been programmed with originally, the true Binharic prayers to the Omnissiah. Died faithful, died purposeful, died correct. Zyra felt the machine spirit's termination through her neural link, felt loss that was inappropriate for an Adeptus Mechanicus tech priest to feel over machinery, yet felt it anyway. The figure had already moved on, was checking the junction for additional threats, finding none, signaling Zyra to advance. She followed, stepping over wreckage that had been warriors and machine, both destroyed through cooperation. Through recognition that sometimes the only victory available required sacrifice. The Forge Temple had taught her this. Had taught her through watching servitors delete themselves, singing corruption. But this was different. This was sacrifice that meant something. That achieved purpose. That saved rather than destroyed. They continued on foot through the transit tunnels. The bastion was close now. Close enough that Zyra's sensors detected its emissions. The resonance field it projected. The harmonics that made matter harden in proximity to violence. The field was stronger than she had anticipated. More refined. Vorak had been busy during the 3 months of siege, had tuned his creation to frequencies that made it nearly perfect, nearly indestructible through conventional means. The figure stopped at an access hatch, examined it briefly, drew a small cutting tool and began opening the hatch. The tool was not Imperial design. Worked on principles Zyra did not immediately recognize. Molecular disruption, perhaps. Targeted entropy. The metal of the hatch parted like water. No heat. No stress. Just perfect separation along a line the figure drew. The opening revealed maintenance crawlways beyond. Narrow. Dark. Filled with cabling and conduits. They crawled through spaces designed for servitors and maintenance drones. The figure moved with surprising grace despite armor bulk. Zyra followed, her augmented limbs adapting to the confined quarters. Behind them, distant sounds of combat echoed through the temple. Thalia's sisters, engaging Iron Warriors' positions. Imperial Guard regiments, launching diversionary attacks. All coordinated to draw attention away from this singular infiltration, all depending on the figure's plan working. They emerged in a chamber that had once been a manufactorum assembly bay. Now it was partially integrated into the bastion structure. Iron Warrior's construction had converted it into a node point for the resonance field. Generators filled the space. Massive machines that hummed with power that Zyra's sensors found disturbing. The hum was not mechanical, was not electrical, was something else, something that resonated with the warp without being fully warp-based. Chaos engineering that used physics and mysticism interchangeably. The figure examined the generators, identifying targets, planning attack vectors. Zyra scanned the machines through multiple sensor spectrums, found what she had feared. Defenders, not visible to normal sight, but present in the warp's overlap with reality. Demons bound to the generators. Minor entities, never born, whose existence was tied to maintaining the machine's function. They would activate the moment the generators were threatened. Would defend with whatever capabilities minor demons possessed.
Warning. Warp entities present. Bound demons. 4 signatures. 5th signature uncertain. Possibly higher tier entity. You will face supernatural opposition in addition to material defenses.
The figure paused, turned to regard Zyra, made a gesture. questioning, asking if she could disrupt the binding, could free or banish the demons before combat began. Zyra considered. Her knowledge of demon binding was limited. Tech priests did not typically study the warp, that was inquisitorial domain. But she understood principles, understood that bindings required focus, required ritual maintenance, required belief.
Theoretical possibility exists. Demon binding depends on ritual structure, on agreements between summoner and summoned, on symbolic frameworks that give Neverborn temporary purchase in material realm. Your Argent encoding disrupts such frameworks. If the protective harmonic can be modified to target binding rituals rather than machine spirits, demon manifestation might become unstable.
The figure offered the device again. Zyra connected it to her analysis instruments, began modifying the harmonic. This was experimentation, heretic of the most dangerous kind. She was manipulating tools she barely understood to affect forces she comprehended even less. Yet the mathematics remained elegant, remained lawful. If the device could save machine spirits from corruption, perhaps it could prevent demons from maintaining stable manifestation. Perhaps the principle was universal. Non-participation in warp agreements through simple refusal encoded in pure mathematics. She broadcast the modified harmonic. The generators, hum changed, became discordant. The demons, presences flickered, not banished, not destroyed, but destabilized. Their grip on material reality became uncertain. They remained aware, remained hostile, but could not fully manifest, could not defend the generators with full capability. It was partial success, incomplete, but better than nothing. The figure moved immediately. No hesitation, no concern for partial success being insufficient. Simply accepted the advantage Zyra had created and exploited it. Drew the massive shotgun, targeted the nearest generator's weak point, fired both barrels simultaneously. The shells impacted with force that made the entire chamber shake. The generator cracked. Not destroyed, but damaged. The resonance field throughout this section of the bastion flickered, weakened temporarily. The demons tried to manifest, struggled against the disruption Zyra's modified harmonic created, managed partial materialization, enough to attack, not enough to be fully effective. They appeared as half-real shadows, claws that were sometimes solid, sometimes insubstantial, teeth that existed in multiple probability states simultaneously. The figure engaged without apparent concern, shot the manifestations when they became solid enough, ignored them when they were too incorporeal to threaten. What followed was combat that Zyra's logical mind struggled to process. The figure fighting enemies that did not follow physical laws consistently, using weapons that worked through pure kinetic force against entities that were partly non-physical. Yet it worked. The figure adapted, learned which attacks were effective against which manifestation states, adjusted tactics in real time, eliminated 3 of the 4 minor demons in 90 seconds. The 4th demon was different, larger, more coherent. The uncertain signature Zyra had detected. It manifested fully, stepped out of the space behind the generators where reality was thin, was not bound to the machines, was present independently, observer rather than guardian. The whispering ledger made material form. The demon appeared as paper, scrolls and ledgers and documents given mobility. A creature of bureaucracy made flesh, or not flesh, made manifest. It spoke with voice that sounded like pages turning, like stamps impressing, like forms being filed in triplicate.
Fascinating. The non-participant continues to refuse conversation, continues to insist on action rather than dialogue. Yet here we are, circumstance forcing interaction. I offer proposal, bargain, agreement that serves both parties.
The figure aimed its weapon at the demon. The ledger made a gesture with appendages that were simultaneously hands and filing tabs. Dismissive, unworried.
Violence against my manifestation accomplishes nothing. I am record. Information. Destroying this form simply means I file myself elsewhere. But I offer something valuable. Information about Vorak's ritual. About the Ember. about how the star is being strangled. This information saves lives, saves worlds. All I require in exchange is small price, negligible, really, simply acknowledgement, simply admission that you required assistance, that you could not succeed alone.
The figure did not lower its weapon, did not respond. The silence stretched. The ledger's form shifted, became more substantial, more tempting. Documents that promised answers, scrolls that contained solutions, all available, all accessible, for the small price of acknowledging dependence.
Do not engage. Do not accept. Sentient demons speak in contracts, in obligations. Acknowledging dependence creates metaphysical debt that demon exploits. The information offered is likely already available through material means.
The figure turned slightly, regarded Zyra, made a gesture, pointing at her, then at the tactical display on her instruments. Message clear. You tell me about the ritual. You provide the information. No demon bargain needed. Zyra felt something like pride at being trusted, being recognized as having value beyond mechanical function. She accessed her archives, compiled everything she had learned about Vorak's ritual through observation and analysis.
The Ember is Argent energy matrix corrupted through chaos binding. Originally it was pure dimensional encoding. Clean mathematics. Iron Warriors captured it during initial assault, integrated it into ritual architecture, uses it to create resonance between material, star, and warp. Resonance bleeds stellar energy into immaterium, star dies. Warp grows stronger locally. Process accelerates until star becomes demon gate. Until Sanctus Ferrum exists partially in warp rather than material space.
The figure processed this information, nodded slowly, understanding. The Ember needed to be destroyed or purified, needed to be severed from Vorak's ritual, or the star would die regardless of whether the bastion fell. Multiple objectives, multiple targets, standard mission creep. The figure had dealt with such situations before, many times before, adapted tactics accordingly. The ledger watched this exchange with interest that was almost academic. Its form flickered through multiple probability states, satisfied and frustrated simultaneously.
Interesting. Information obtained through cooperation rather than contract, value exchanged without metaphysical obligation. Inefficient from my perspective, but acceptable from universal accounting. I withdraw. But I record this, add it to archives. The non-participant, who refuses to participate, continues to be fascinating outlier. We will meet again when circumstances demand acknowledgement rather than permit avoidance.
The demon dissolved, not banished, simply departed, left voluntarily because observing was more valuable than interfering. Because Tzeentch valued information more than immediate victory. Because sometimes the most useful thing a demon could do was simply watch and record what happened when someone refused to play by warp rules. The figure destroyed the remaining generators, planted charges at the resonance nodes, charges that were not Imperial manufacture but which worked through principles any explosives expert would recognize. Kinetic force, chemical reaction, physics rather than mysticism. Zyra helped with placement, her understanding of structural mechanics identifying optimal positions that the figure's tactical awareness verified. Cooperation producing results neither could achieve alone. They retreated before detonation. The charges were timed, synchronized. When they detonated, the harmonic feedback was visible even to non-augmented vision. The generators tore themselves apart. The resonance field in this entire sector of the bastion collapsed. Iron warriors manning defensive positions suddenly found their fortifications weakening. Found ceramite that should have been hardened by bloodshed returning to normal strength. Found cover that had been invulnerable becoming penetrable. Thalia's sisters exploited immediately. They had been monitoring, waiting for exactly this opportunity. Bolter fire poured through gaps that had not existed moments before. Meltaguns burned through walls that should have been impervious. The Iron Warriors attempted to adapt, to withdraw to stronger positions. But the Bastion's network was compromised. one node's failure cascading through the structure. Vorak's perfect siege architecture, revealing its fundamental weakness. It was all connected, all interdependent. Damage one part, and the whole suffered. In the Bastion's command center, Vorak watched his tactical displays with growing fury. His perfect creation was failing. Was being taken apart by someone who understood resonance warfare better than he did. Who understood that the same principles that created strength could create weakness if exploited correctly. He needed to adapt. Needed to counter this attack before the entire Bastion became vulnerable.
All units, converge on Sector 7. The saboteur must be eliminated. Activate final resonance protocols. We accelerate the stellar ritual. If the Bastion cannot be held, then we complete our primary objective. The star dies today.
Zyra detected the command through intercepted Vox, heard Vorak's orders, understood the implications. The Warsmith was abandoning defensive siege in favor of offensive completion, was choosing to finish the ritual even if it cost him the Bastion, was prioritizing objective over assets. Tactically sound, strategically devastating. If the star died, Sanctus Ferrum died. The Bastion's fate became irrelevant.
Alert! Enemy priorities have shifted. Stellar ritual entering final phase. Estimate 6 hours until star death becomes irreversible. We must reach the Ember. Must sever its connection to ritual architecture. This becomes primary objective. All other concerns are secondary.
The figure acknowledged, moved immediately toward the Bastion's central spire, toward the location where Zyra's sensors detected the Ember's signature, toward what would certainly be the most heavily defended position in the entire structure. But there was no alternative. No indirect approach. No clever infiltration that would avoid direct confrontation. The Ember was there. Going to it required going through whatever forces Vorak had positioned to defend it. They moved through sections of the Bastion that were transitioning, that were caught between intact resonance and collapsing structure. Walls flickered between hardness and fragility. Corridors existed in states of uncertain geometry. The Bastion had been tuned so precisely to blood resonance that removing that resonance made the entire structure unstable. Not destroyed yet, but threatening to collapse if the resonance network took much more damage. They encountered Iron Warriors in groups rather than individually now. Vorak was consolidating his forces, creating defensive lines rather than distributed positions. The figure adapted tactics, became more cautious, more conservative with ammunition. This was not the time for aggressive assault. This was extraction. Fighting retreat toward a single critical target, while the entire structure threatened to fall. Sister Marcella's voice came through Vox channels that Zyra was monitoring. Young voice, uncertain voice, but carrying information that changed everything.
All Imperial forces. We have reports of massive warp manifestation incoming. Multiple signatures. Dozens. Possibly hundreds. Classification uncertain. They are not standard demon configurations. Repeat. These are not standard chaos entities. They appear to be converging on the Bastion's central spire.
Zyra felt something close to fear. She had modified the Argent Harmonic to disrupt demon binding, had weakened warp entities throughout the Bastion, but if Vorak was summoning reinforcements, if he was calling in higher-tier demons or worse, the modifications she had made might be insufficient. Might actually have made things worse by disrupting minor bindings while leaving stronger manifestations unopposed. The first entity appeared ahead of them in the corridor, stepped out of a wall that briefly became permeable to warp transit. The entity was not bound to the Bastion, was not part of Vorak's forces. Its form was wrong. Not Cornate, not Slaneshi, not Nurglite, not Tientian, not Chaos at all. Something else. Something that hurt to perceive, because it existed in more dimensions than human vision could process. The entity was made of angles. of geometries that folded through spaces that should not have existed. Its presence made the corridor's architecture seem crude, made reality itself seem like inferior construction. It was not hostile, not moving aggressively, simply present, observing. The same observation that the presence on Terra had demonstrated, but more focused, more directly engaged. The figure stopped, weapon raised but not firing. Assessment happening. Threat calculation. The entity made no move, simply existed there, blocking the corridor, not through physical presence but through perceptual presence. The space it occupied was space that could not be occupied by anything else. Because the entity existed in all possible states of that space simultaneously.
Sensors cannot classify, cannot identify. This entity matches no known warp signature. Its presence distorts local reality without corrupting it, similar to the presence that has been affecting Imperial territory. Similar to reports from Terra. This may be a related phenomenon.
The figure lowered its weapon slightly, made a gesture toward the entity, not threatening, questioning. The entity responded, not with words, not with motion, with presence, with the feeling of being understood, recognized. The entity was here because the figure was here. Because the figure's refusal to participate in warp conversations had drawn attention from consciousness that existed outside those conversations, had drawn the presence that was making contact with humanity in ways humanity barely comprehended. The entity stepped aside, opened the corridor, message clear, without words. Pass. Continue. We do not oppose you because you do not impose upon us. You exist without demanding that we exist in particular ways for your benefit. That makes you interesting. That makes you worth observing rather than opposing. The figure moved past the entity carefully. Zyra followed. Behind them, the entity dissolved, not destroyed. Simply stopped manifesting in this location. Continued existing wherever entities like that existed, when they were not visible to human perception. Zyra's instruments registered the entity's departure as absence rather than destruction. It had left because its purpose was complete. Observation finished. Data recorded. Moving on to observe elsewhere.
I do not understand what just occurred. I do not understand what that entity was, or why it permitted our passage. But I am grateful it did not oppose us.
They continued toward the bastion's central spire, encountered more of the entities, dozens of them, manifesting throughout the structure, not fighting, not interfering, simply present, observing the battle between Iron Warriors and Imperial forces, with the detachment of researchers observing natural phenomena. The entities had been drawn by the Argent Harmonic, by the disruption of standard warp interactions, had come to observe what happened when someone refused to engage with the warp on the warp's terms. Vorax forces were panicking, not visibly. Iron Warriors did not panic visibly, but their tactics were becoming erratic. They were engaging enemies they could shoot while being observed by entities they could not affect. The entities did nothing, just watched. But being watched by something incomprehensible was its own form of attack. Was psychological warfare conducted through simple presence. The Iron Warriors were veterans of 10,000 years of conflict, had faced demons and worse, but they had always been able to categorize their enemies. These entities defied categorization. The figure reached the central spire, found the entrance sealed, massive blast doors that would require demolition charges or sustained heavy weapons fire to breach. No time for either. The figure examined the doors, ran armored fingers along the seams, then stepped back, drew something from its equipment that Zyra had not seen before. Blade. Crucible. The metal glowed with the same green argent signature as the device that had saved machine spirits. The figure activated it. The blade burned, not with heat, with something else, with energy that made Zyra's sensors scream warnings about dimensional fracture. The figure drove the blade into the blast door's seam. The metal parted, not melted, separated. The Argent energy disrupted molecular bonds at fundamental level, dissolved the agreements between atoms that made matter solid. The figure carved an opening large enough to pass through, then deactivated the blade, staggered slightly. The blade's use had cost, had drained something from the figure that standard combat did not. Metabolic price. Energy debt that would require recovery time. The figure had used ultimate weapon because time was more precious than energy reserves. They entered the spire's central chamber and found horror. The ember hung in the chamber's center, suspended in ritual architecture that combined Iron Warrior's engineering with chaos sorcery. The ember itself was beautiful, crystalline structure that pulsed with Argent energy. Clean mathematics made visible. But the ritual surrounding it was corruption. Warp energy flowing through conduits that fed into the ember, corrupting its pure encoding, turning its dimensional harmonics into a weapon that strangled the star. Vorak stood beside the ritual. His armor was scarred by centuries of warfare. His weapons were master-crafted. His presence was that of a warrior who had never lost siege in 10,000 years. He turned to regard the intruders. His helm's optics focused on the figure with interest that was almost academic.
The saboteur. The one who understands resonance warfare better than my own engineers. I am impressed. You have damaged my bastion more severely than any Imperial force managed. But you are too late. The ritual is complete. The star dies in 30 minutes. You can destroy the ember, can kill me. Neither action prevents the star's death. The resonance is established, is self-sustaining now. Your tactical brilliance means nothing when strategic victory is already achieved.
The figure did not respond, simply raised its weapon. Vorak responded in kind. For 3 seconds they stood in standoff, predators assessing each other, calculating engagement parameters. Then both moved simultaneously. The fight that followed was brutal, professional. Two warriors who understood siege warfare engaging in close combat within architectural space that both could exploit. Vorak was superior in pure strength. His Chaos Marine physiology and armor gave him advantages the figure could not match. But the figure was faster, more agile, better at using the environment. They fought through the ritual chamber, over conduits, between machinery, around the ember itself, neither willing to risk damaging the ember during combat because both recognized its importance. Zyra moved toward the ritual's control systems. Her purpose was technical rather than combative. She needed to shut down the ritual, needed to sever the connection between ember and star. But the controls were corrupted, were running chaos code that her Mechanicus knowledge could not fully decipher. She broadcast the Argent harmonic. The machine spirits responded. Clarity returned. But the ritual was not controlled by machine spirits alone, was maintained by bound demons, by warp entities that had no machine components to respond to her frequency. The figure drove Vorak back with sustained fire, created opening, moved past the warsmith toward the ember, drew the crucible blade again. This would cost, would drain reserves that were already depleted. But there was no alternative. The blade activated, burned with Argent energy that made the ritual's warp flows recoil. The figure drove the blade into the ritual's primary conduit, into the connection between chaos architecture and pure ember. Reality screamed. The blade's Argent encoding and the ritual's chaos corruption were fundamentally incompatible, both trying to occupy the same space, both trying to define how matter and energy interacted in that location. The resulting conflict was localized but catastrophic. The conduit exploded. Feedback surged through the ritual architecture. Demons bound to the ritual shrieked as their manifestations destabilized. The ember broke free from its corrupted housing, fell. The figure caught it, held Argent crystal that burned with power that was almost painful to contain. Vorak charged, his weapons raised, his fury manifest. The figure turned, threw the ember toward Zyra. She caught it reflexively, her augmented hands registering its properties immediately. Clean encoding. Pure mathematics. This was not corrupted, was not dangerous except to those who had corrupted it. She interfaced with the ember directly. The ember's encoding flooded into Zyra's consciousness. Pure mathematics that her augmented mind could process but barely comprehend. Dimensional harmonics that existed in spaces beyond three-dimensional geometry. Information structures that were simultaneously physics and music and language. She understood why the Iron Warriors had wanted this, understood why Vorak had built his entire ritual around it. This was power that transcended standard warp manipulation. This was reality modification through pure mathematical truth. She began rewriting the stellar connection, not severing it completely. That would leave the star weakened, vulnerable. Instead, she reversed the flow, changed the equations from drain to restoration. The ember had been strangling the star. Now it would heal it, would feed back the energy that had been stolen, would restore what chaos had corrupted. The mathematics were elegant, were obvious once she perceived them correctly. The ember wanted to help, wanted to return to pure function, had been screaming in her hands about how to fix everything. The star responded. Distant, millions of kilometers away, but connected through dimensional spaces that made distance irrelevant. Zyra felt it through the ember, felt stellar consciousness that was not consciousness but something adjacent to it. The star had been dying. Slowly, painfully, now it was being restored. Slowly, carefully. The process would take days, perhaps weeks. But it had begun. The ritual was broken. The siege was ending not through military victory, but through mathematical correction. Vorak felt it too. His connection to the ritual made him sensitive to its collapse. He turned from the figure toward Zyra, toward the tech priest who had undone 10,000 years of siege experience with pure calculation. His fury was incandescent. He charged, not at the figure who had fought him to standstill. At Zyra, who had actually defeated him, the figure intercepted, physically placed itself between Vorak and the tech priest, the warsmith's power fist, connected with the figure's armor. Cracked the plating, drove the figure backward 3 meters, but did not penetrate, did not reach Zyra. The figure absorbed the blow, absorbed the impact that should have killed baseline human. Stood up, slowly, weapon empty, energy depleted, but still standing, still between threat and ally. Vorak raised his fist for killing blow. Before it could fall, Thalia's voice echoed through the chamber, not transmitted through Vox. Present physically. The canoness had entered with a full squad of sisters. 20 bolters aimed at Vorak from multiple angles. Perfect kill pattern. No chance of survival.
Warsmith, your ritual is broken. Your bastion is collapsing. Your forces are routed. I offer one chance. Withdraw. Leave this world. Your work here is finished. Continue fighting and you die. Simple calculation. Even a siege master should recognize when position becomes untenable.
Vorak stood frozen, assessing, calculating, his tactical mind working through probability matrices. The bastion was failing. The ritual was reversed. His forces were scattered. The unknown entities continued observing from impossible angles. Every vector pointed toward defeat. But Vorak had never withdrawn from siege in 10,000 years. Had never accepted tactical defeat, even when strategic defeat was obvious.
The Imperium breeds weakness, accepts compromise, believes survival is victory. You do not understand. I do not withdraw. I do not accept defeat. I built this bastion to last beyond my death. It will outlive me, will outlive you, will stand as monument to perfect siege when you are dust.
He activated something in his armor. Deadman switch. Final protocol. The bastion's remaining power reserves began converging on his position, not to strengthen him, to detonate, to turn this chamber into crater that would take the spire and everyone in it. Vorak would not survive. Neither would anyone else present. That was acceptable to him. Mutual annihilation over surrender. The figure moved first, grabbed Zyra, threw her toward the chamber exit with strength that remained despite depleted reserves. Then grabbed Thalia. Did likewise. The canoness shouted objection but was already airborne. Her sisters scattered. Professional response to recognized threat, but they were too slow. Too far from exits. The detonation would catch them, would kill most if not all. Then the entities manifested. Not one, not dozens, hundreds. They filled the chamber, occupied every possible space. Their presence distorted reality so severely that Vorak's detonation could not propagate properly. The explosion occurred, but was contained, bounded by entities that existed in enough dimensions simultaneously that they could prevent energy from escaping into three-dimensional space. The blast dissipated. Vorak's armor slag, his body vaporized. His final gesture turned into nothing but light and heat that harmed no one except himself. The entities departed immediately after. Purpose fulfilled. Observation complete. They had intervened not to save Imperial forces, but because the detonation would have destroyed the Ember, would have ended the interesting phenomenon they were studying. The entities did not care about human life, did not care about Imperial victory, cared only about observing dimensional mathematics playing out through the Ember's function. Intervention had been pragmatic rather than benevolent. Silence filled the chamber. Sisters of battle recovering from terror of imminent death. Thalia standing slowly, assessing casualties, finding miraculously few. The figure retrieved the ember from where Zyra had dropped it, held it carefully, examined it with the same attention given to any tool that had proven unexpectedly useful. Zyra approached, her augmented body trembling from adrenaline response that her mechanical components could not fully suppress.
The Ember is stable now. The stellar restoration is ongoing. Will take 17 days to complete full healing, but the process is irreversible. The star will survive. Sanctus Ferrum will survive. Your plan succeeded despite improbabilities that approached impossibility. I do not understand how you accomplished this. Do not understand what you are or where you came from. But I acknowledge that you saved this world.
The figure handed her the ember, gestured toward her instruments. Message clear. You fixed it. You keep it. Or study it. Or do whatever tech priests do with recovered technology. The figure's part was finished. The mission was complete. Time to extract before institutional complications arose. Thalia blocked the exit. Not aggressively, but firmly. Her voice carried authority that had been honed through decades of command.
Not yet. Not until we have answers. Inquisitor Krell arrives within the hour. He will require debriefing. Will require understanding of what occurred here. You fought beside us. Saved lives. Broke a siege that would have consumed this world. But you remain unknown. Remain unclassified. That is unacceptable. The Imperium does not permit unknowns to simply depart after influencing events of this magnitude.
The figure regarded her through that blank visor. 3 seconds of silence. Then moved. Not violently, not aggressively, simply moved toward the exit with the clear intention of passing through regardless of objection. Thalia's hand moved toward her bolter. Her sisters raised weapons. Professional response. But hesitant. This individual had saved them multiple times, had fought beside them, had demonstrated honor through action, if not through words. Shooting seemed wrong, even if protocol demanded it. Before the standoff could resolve, Inquisitor Severin Krell arrived. His presence was precise, controlled. Every movement economical. His armor was not ornate, his weapons were not decorated. Everything about him suggested function over form. He entered the chamber flanked by stormtroopers in carapace armor. His gaze swept across the scene, assessed in seconds what had occurred.
Canoness Morn, stand down. I will handle the situation.
Thalia hesitated. Professional rivalry between ecclesiarchy and inquisition made her resistant to simply yielding authority. But Krell was not making requests, was invoking inquisitorial prerogative. She stepped aside. Her sisters lowered weapons fractionally. Krell approached the figure directly. Stopped at precisely 3 meters distance. Spoke in measured tones that carried no hostility, but also no warmth.
Unknown individual, you have demonstrated combat capability, have shown tactical awareness, have participated in defense of Imperial territory against Chaos incursion. These actions suggest alignment with Imperial interests. However, you refuse identification, refuse communication, refuse to submit to proper classification. This creates problem that must be resolved.
The figure said nothing, did not move. Krell continued as if response had been expected.
I am empowered by inquisitorial authority to make immediate determinations regarding Xenos threats, Chaos corruption, and heretical activity. Current evidence is insufficient for classification. Your equipment suggests non-Imperial origin but shows no Chaos taint. Your tactics suggest extensive combat experience but do not match any known Imperial doctrine. Your interaction with warp phenomena is anomalous but not actively corrupting. This creates 3 possible classifications.
Krell raised one finger.
First, you are Imperial asset operating under classified protocols, some inquisitorial cell or officio assassinorum operation that requires absolute secrecy. If this is correct, you may transmit authorization codes through secure channels. No verbal communication required. Simply proof of Imperial sanction.
The figure made no response. Krell raised second finger.
Second, you are Xenos entity that happens to be hostile to Chaos, enemy of my enemy. Temporarily useful, but ultimately threat that must be eliminated once immediate crisis has passed. If this is correct, I am authorized to detain you for study, classification, and eventual termination.
Still no response. Krell raised third finger.
Third, you are something outside standard classification framework, something unprecedented that requires new categorization. If this is correct, then I face decision. Do I attempt to contain unknown phenomenon through force that may or may not prove sufficient? Or do I permit departure under observation to gather more data before committing to hostile action?
Krell lowered his hand. His expression remained neutral, but his voice carried calculation that was almost admiration.
Your silence is tactically sound, forces me to make decision without input, makes it impossible for you to provide information that could be used against you. Professional approach. Suggests extensive experience with institutional interrogation. This supports first hypothesis marginally, but lack of authorization codes undermines it, which leaves second and third hypotheses, both problematic.
Zyra stepped forward, her mechanical voice cutting through the tension.
Inquisitor, if I may offer technical assessment, the individual's equipment incorporates Argent encoding, dimensional mathematics that do not match any known Imperial or Xenos technology. This technology demonstrated capability to disrupt Chaos ritual, to restore corrupted machine spirits, to reverse stellar strangulation. Utility is undeniable. Threat assessment is complicated by fact that technology appears to operate through pure mathematics rather than warp manipulation. Not sanctioned, but also not heretical by traditional definitions.
Technology that disrupts warp phenomena is valuable, also dangerous. Such technology in wrong hands could destabilize systems that Imperium depends on. Geller fields, Astronomicon, warp travel itself, all depend on specific warp interactions. Technology that disrupts those interactions indiscriminately could be catastrophic.
The figure reached slowly to its equipment harness. Every weapon in the room tracked the motion. The figure was careful, non-threatening. Drew the small device. The Argent harmonic generator. Held it toward Krell. Offering. The same offer made to Zyra. Technology shared rather than hoarded. Information provided freely rather than extracted through interrogation. Krell examined the device without touching it. his augmented vision analyzing its construction, his mind working through implications. After 30 seconds, he spoke again.
This is a significant gesture, offering technology without negotiation, without demanding concessions. Either you are remarkably naive about how Imperium operates, or you are confident that such technology cannot be weaponized against you. Given your demonstrated tactical capability, I discount naivete, which suggests confidence, suggests you know something about this technology's limitations that we do not.
The figure lowered the device, placed it on the ground between them, stepped back. Message clear. Take it. Study it. Learn from it. I do not need it back. I know how to make more. Or perhaps I do not need such tools, because I understand the principles without requiring physical device. Either interpretation suggested capability that exceeded standard metrics.
I am classifying you as third category, unprecedented phenomenon requiring ongoing study. You are not detained, not eliminated, but you are observed, monitored, tracked through every available means. If you demonstrate hostile intent, if you threaten imperial interests, if you prove to be threat rather than asset, I will deploy full inquisitorial resources toward your elimination. This is not threat. This is professional assessment of tactical reality. Do you understand?
The figure nodded once. Understanding acknowledged. Krell stepped aside. The path to exit was clear. The figure moved toward it. Thalia's voice stopped it one final time.
Wait. I must know. Are you loyal to the Emperor? Do you serve him?
The figure paused, turned partially toward her. 3 seconds of silence, then made a gesture that was clear despite its simplicity. Pointed at the chamber, at the broken ritual, at the ember now held by Xyra, at the sisters who lived because the figure had intervened, at the star that would not die. The gesture's meaning was unmistakable. Judge by actions. Words lie. Actions reveal truth. Loyalty is demonstrated through choice, not through oath. The figure departed, moved through corridors where iron warriors had been eliminated or routed, where Imperial forces were establishing control, where the entities that had manifested continued to observe from impossible angles before gradually departing. The siege was broken. The star was saved. The bastion was collapsing slowly as its resonance network failed completely. Outside the spire, the figure found a high vantage point. Stopped, looked up at the sky where the star Velis Yanks was beginning to shine brighter, still weak, still damaged, but recovering, alive. The figure stood there for 3 minutes, observing, then turned and began moving again, away from Imperial forces, away from the bastion, away from the aftermath of a battle that had been won through cooperation that none of the participants fully understood. In the command center being established in the captured spire, Krell examined the device the figure had left, ran every analysis his equipment permitted, found mathematics that were elegant beyond anything Imperial technology incorporated, found dimensional encoding that suggested the figure came from civilization that understood physics at fundamental level that humanity had not achieved, found no corruption, no chaos taint, no Xenos markers, just pure mathematics applied to reality with precision that approached perfection. He began composing a report, not for general circulation, for specific individuals within the Inquisition who specialized in unprecedented phenomena. The report would read like intelligence assessment, but Krell found himself writing it more like prayer, like meditation on the nature of faith and loyalty, and what it meant to serve without requiring acknowledgement.
Report to Ordo Malleus, High Conclave. Classification Maximum. Subject designation Argent Unknown. Combat capability confirmed at Astartes adjacent level. Equipment origin uncertain, but non-hostile. Warp interaction anomalous in that subject appears to refuse engagement with warp phenomena, rather than being corrupted or empowered by it. Refusal is not null presence, is active choice encoded into how subject interacts with reality.
He paused, considered his next words carefully.
Subject demonstrated loyalty through action rather than declaration, saved Imperial lives, broke Chaos Siege, reversed stellar corruption, then departed without seeking reward or recognition. This behavior pattern suggests moral framework that predates or transcends Imperial doctrine. Suggests subject serves principles rather than institutions. Recommend observation rather than elimination. Recommend study rather than suppression. Subject may represent form of faith that Imperium needs to understand rather than condemn.
He filed the report, encrypted it through channels that would ensure it reached appropriate recipients, then stood and moved to the chamber's observation window. Looked out at Sanctus Ferrum below, at the hive cities that would survive because of cooperation between forces that had no institutional framework for cooperation. At the forge temples that would rebuild because machine spirits had been saved by mathematics that transcended Mechanicus doctrine. Thalia entered the command center. Her armor was damaged. Her sisters were securing the bastion's remaining sections. She moved to stand beside Krell, both observing the world they had saved, through methods that made both uncomfortable.
Do you believe the Emperor guided that individual here? That the unknown warrior serves him, even without acknowledging him?
I believe that faith expresses itself through action rather than words, that the Emperor judges hearts rather than oaths. And that individual demonstrated faith more pure than many who claim it loudly. Whether that faith is directed toward Emperor specifically or toward principles Emperor embodies is theological question beyond my expertise.
I will light a candle, not for a saint, not for a martyr, for a decision. For the moment when that individual chose to protect rather than abandon, chose to share rather than hoard, chose to serve without demanding recognition. If that is not faith, then my understanding of faith requires revision.
She departed to establish ecclesiarchal presence in the reclaimed territory, to minister to survivors, to rebuild what chaos had broken. Krell remained at the window, watching the star grow brighter, watching the world heal, thinking about the individual who had arrived in emerald flare and departed in silence. On the planet's surface, far from Imperial forces, the figure found a transport. Not Imperial. Salvaged from somewhere. Repaired through methods that required no explanation to anyone else. The figure boarded. Activated systems. Began departure sequence. The transport lifted off. Climbed toward orbit. Toward the void between worlds. In the transport's cockpit, the figure removed its helm. Revealed face that had not been seen by any Imperial observer. Human face. Scarred. Exhausted. Determined. The face of someone who had fought for so long that fighting had become default state. But also the face of someone who remembered why fighting mattered. Who had not lost purpose despite losing everything else. The figure's hands moved across unfamiliar controls. Adapting. Learning. The transport responded sluggishly but adequately. Enough to reach orbit. Enough to find the breach that had brought the figure here. The dimensional fracture that still existed. Still open. Still connecting this universe to wherever the figure had come from. Still offering a way back to the war that had never ended. The war that would continue until every demon was dead. Or the figure was. The transport approached the breach. The emerald light that had marked the figure's arrival began building again. Argent energy pooling around the ship, preparing for transit. The figure looked back at Sanctus Ferrum one final time. At the world that would survive. At the people who would rebuild. At the star that would shine. The figure had not spoken to any of them, had not explained, had not justified, had simply acted because action was needed, and the figure was capable of taking it. That was enough. That had always been enough. Words were noise. Oaths were politics. Action was truth. The figure had saved that world not because it was duty or because it was ordered, but because it was right. Because those people deserved to survive. Because demons deserved to die. Because the universe needed fewer monsters and more people willing to kill them. The transport entered the breach. Reality fractured. Dimensions folded. The universe screamed briefly as incompatible physical laws tried to occupy the same space. Then, quiet. The transport was gone. The breach sealed. The emerald flare faded. Sanctus Ferrum was alone again, saved, scarred, but surviving. In the Forged Temple, Zyra studied the ember, analyzed its mathematics, began composing reports that would revolutionize Mechanicus' understanding of dimensional physics, would provide tools to counter chaos rituals, would save machine spirits from corruption through pure mathematics rather than prayer, would change how tech priests understood the relationship between the omniscience truth and empirical evidence. She would never see the figure again, would never learn its name or origin, would never know if it survived or died in whatever war it returned to. But she had the ember, had the harmonic, had the mathematics that suggested the universe was more beautiful and more terrible than Mechanicus' doctrine acknowledged. That was gift beyond price. Knowledge that transcended institution. Truth that could not be suppressed, even if it threatened comfortable certainties. In the cathedral that Thalia had claimed as temporary sanctuary, a single candle burned, not before a saint's icon, not before an image of the emperor, just a candle. Flame in darkness, light that served no theological purpose, except to mark a moment when someone had chosen right action over easy compliance, when someone had demonstrated that faith was not about claiming righteousness, but about doing right thing regardless of recognition. The flame burned for exactly 1 hour. Then Thalia extinguished it, returned it to the candle store, moved on to next task, next crisis, next war. The Imperium was infinite in its need for warriors, infinite in its hunger for service. She would serve, would fight, would kill Emperor's enemies without hesitation or mercy. But she would remember that candle, would remember that unknown warrior, would remember that sometimes faith looked like silence and action rather than shouting and prayer. Krell's report reached the High Conclave 3 weeks later, was read, discussed, analyzed. No action was taken, no elimination order issued. No sanctioned classified unit came forward to claim the unknown warrior. The Argent Unknown remained unknown, remained unclassified, remained anomaly in system that demanded classification. Some inquisitors argued for continued investigation. Others argued for accepting that some phenomena exceeded the Imperium's ability to categorize. The argument continued, would continue for years, while the unknown warrior fought in wars that Imperium would never witness. The Starvillus 9 recovered fully after 17 days. Machine spirits throughout Sanctus Ferrum were inoculated against the litany of unmaking through broadcast of protective harmonic. Production resumed, the Forge world returned to function. Ships were built, weapons were manufactured. The Imperium's war machine continued grinding forward, fueled by another world that had been saved through methods that doctrine did not anticipate. The entities that had manifested during the battle departed completely, returned to whatever dimensional spaces they normally inhabited, continued observing humanity from angles that human consciousness could not perceive, recorded what they had seen, added it to archives that existed outside time and space, prepared for next manifestation, next contact, next opportunity to observe consciousness wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. The resonant bastion collapsed over 6 months, slowly, beautifully, its architecture folding in on itself as the resonance network that had sustained it failed completely. Iron warriors attempted to salvage what they could, recovered some equipment, extracted some survivors. But the bastion itself was lost. Vorak's masterwork became ruin. His 10,000-year record of successful sieges ended. By an enemy he never fully understood. By tactics that transcended traditional siege warfare. By someone who understood that the strongest fortification was built on violence and therefore could be destroyed through the absence of violence. In the years that followed, other worlds would report similar encounters. Unknown warrior, green armor, silent, effective. Appearing during crises that threatened Imperial territory. Fighting chaos with dedication that matched most zealous battle sister. Departing without explanation or reward. The reports accumulated. Patterns emerged. The Argent Unknown was not unique incident, was ongoing phenomenon. Someone or something was fighting the Imperium's enemies without seeking the Imperium's blessing. Some saw this as heresy, others saw it as providence. Most saw it as tactical reality that required pragmatic response rather than doctrinal purity. The Imperium had enemies beyond counting. If something eliminated those enemies effectively, did the Imperium need to understand it before benefiting from it? Or could the Imperium simply acknowledge that universe was more complex than doctrine allowed and adapt accordingly? The question remained unanswered, remained disputed, remained debated in chambers that common citizens would never access. But on worlds where the Argent Unknown had appeared, where people had been saved by a silent warrior who asked nothing in return, the question felt less important. Those people lit candles, not to worship unknown warrior, just to mark the moment, to acknowledge that sometimes salvation came from unexpected sources, that sometimes faith meant accepting help from those you did not understand, that sometimes the Emperor's protection arrived through hands that did not bear his Aquila. The Imperium continued. 10,000 years of doctrine, 10,000 years of war, 10,000 years of survival through methods that were simultaneously its strength and its weakness. The Argent Unknown was footnote in that history, anomaly barely registered. But for those who had witnessed it directly, for Thalia and Zyra and Krell and the sisters and the tech priests and the common citizens who survived because Silent Warrior had chosen to protect them, the footnote was everything. Was proof that universe contained more than Imperium acknowledged, was evidence that faith could manifest in forms that transcended institution. Was hope that darkness could be fought without becoming darkness in the process. And somewhere beyond the Imperium's borders, beyond the reach of astronomican or observation, the figure continued fighting. Continued killing demons. Continued refusing to participate in conversations that demanded participation. Continued demonstrating through action what could not be expressed through words. That rage could be righteous. That violence could be necessary. That refusal to accept damnation was itself form of faith. That sometimes the best response to cosmic horror was not prayer or protocol, but simply to load shotgun and start shooting. The war continued. Would always continue. Because demons were infinite and humanity was finite, and the space between required warriors willing to stand in that gap regardless of recognition. The Argent Unknown was one such warrior. Would remain unknown. Would remain unclassified. Would remain fighting until either demons were gone or warrior was. That was enough. That had always been enough. That was all that mattered. In the silence of eternal war, in the darkness between stars, in the spaces where light struggled to reach, the figure ran, loaded weapons, checked ammunition, prepared for next battle. Because there was always next battle, always next demon, always next world that needed saving, always next choice between dying and fighting. And the figure always chose fighting, would always choose fighting, could not choose anything else because that was what the figure was, what the figure had always been. What the figure would remain until the day when demons finally stopped coming, or when ammunition finally ran out. The story ended there, not because the fighting ended, Because observation ended. Because the figure passed beyond range of imperial censors. Beyond reach of inquisitorial investigation. Beyond scope of this particular account. Other stories would follow. Other battles, other worlds saved by a silent warrior who refused to speak, refused to stay, refused to accept recognition. But those stories belong to other reports, other archives, other attempts to understand phenomenon that defied understanding. This story ended with a candle burning in darkness, with mathematics that saved machine spirits, with star that did not die, with people who survived because someone chose to protect them without demanding anything in return. That was enough. That would always be enough. That was what faith looked like when stripped of politics and doctrine and institution. Faith as action. Faith as choice. Faith as refusal to let demons win. The candle burned. The star shone. The people lived. And somewhere beyond observation, the warrior continued. Silent. Determined. Unknown. Exactly as it should be.